Hello, and welcome to Expertise is Overrated, the podcast that takes the time to answer the questions you didn't know you didn't want the answers to. I'm Vib.
And I'm Sean, and neither of us has any clue what we're talking about. Before we get to the episode, let's award the much vaunted Expertise is Overrated Tinfoil Award. Now, I can't believe that this is happening again, given all of the nonsense you spouted, right? But apparently, I've got this again. Because I said a couple of slightly stupid things, like Arya is purely part of the magical plot. I admit that was a bit silly. And accidentally uttered the word large folk when I wasn't thinking.
That on its own is enough of a reason. I mean, it's not tinfoil, but it's extreme stupidity.
This just feels... I feel like the cards are stacked against me here, but I am getting an honourable mention here. I'm pulling, I don't know what I'm using, but some sort of trump card or whatever it is to say that you came very, very, very close to getting it for your absolutely nonsense
for
statement.
Speaking the truth.
That Robert Baratheon went to war for love. Just no, absolutely not. Go back and reread the series.
It's the truth. I'm prepared to die on this hill. Much like Robert was for Lyanna's heart. No, you're quite right. It was a very close call, but I think it was just the combination of saying Arya is purely magical. It's that you stressed it so much.
I was
and then combining it with large folk. And then, frankly, for suggesting that Bran was a hero, but you're not going to let me have that one. So, moving on. Let's talk a bit about some feedback on our previous episodes.
Yeah, so we've had some good feedback, and we really encourage you to keep it coming. It does actually really make doing this worth it.
Oh, absolutely.
Much though we love the sounds of our own voices, we don't actually have to record these, so you guys pitching in really, really gives us a reason to keep irritating you with the nonsense that we're spouting.
100%. I mean, part of the reason that I want comments is so I can actually get a better co-host.
Wow.
No, but a very close friend of mine gave me some personal feedback on one of the Warhammer, or both the Warhammer episodes, actually. She said she listened to it having never, or not knowing anything about the Warhammer universe, and she said she quite enjoyed them. And is thinking about starting to maybe collect some models, which would be fun. Even though she claims she's useless at painting, but Games Workshop, you know what to do.
Yeah, our invoice is in the post.
Yeah, we expect full payout there.
But yeah, if you've been inspired to take up anything that we've talked about, give the Dresden Files a read, watch or read The Lord of the Rings, do let us know. We also had a lot of good comments on our most recent episode talking about who the hero of A Song of Ice and Fire is. Some really, really good comments, particularly on the A Song of Ice and Fire subreddit. The consensus on that sub seems to be that some variation of the main five, whoever they might be, are the heroes. But I would say, at the moment, Jon Snow is in the lead as the sub's favourite for overall hero of the series.
I think so. It's interesting that you say whoever the main five may be, because just before we started recording this one, you wrote down who the main five were, and I disagreed with you. So we're clearly not done with that discussion.
I think we'd need to go back to the pitch letter that Martin wrote to work out exactly who people.
What does Martin know about it?
So that was going to be my next point. There were some really interesting points around what Martin's intent was, what he wanted people to take away from his series. One of the first comments we received was that there are no heroes. Everyone is some sort of shade of grey. But unfortunately for that person, they use Jaime Lannister as their example, and I refuse to accept that Jaime Lannister is anything other than a filthy criminal and absolute villain. So,
it was an unfortunate use, wasn't it, of an unfortunate example to pick. But it's an interesting point. Well, I say it's interesting. It's kind of it's the one point that everyone's been using for years, and is therefore kind of dull, actually. So,
I also don't think that it's quite as shades of grey a series as everyone likes to think that it is, because there are some genuine good people and some genuine villains. So,
well, you say that. It was interesting that one person commented on your example of Rob, right, and said, "Well, why is Rob a good guy?"
Yeah, no, I thought that was fair. I disagree with them. No, this was the Rob's campaign in the Riverlands, and the fact that he waged he essentially sacked the Riverlands, and that not the Riverlands, sorry, the Westerlands, and that therefore should
and crucially reneged on a deal he made with someone.
Well, I don't know that was their point. I think their point
No, but
was
it's my point.
Is your point, but I have an answer to your point. But that's last week's episode.
Absolutely, and clearly an episode coming to you in the future.
there's another episode. I think on Shades of Grey in A Song of Ice and Fire. That feels like what we should be talking about. But no, as we said, thank you very much for all your feedback, and do keep it
Absolutely.
coming.
That feedback is very, very important to us. Right, shall we get to it?
Let's.
What are we actually doing today?
So today, we said that we were going to try and get to the bottom of the concept of immortality in the Dresden files. What is it, first? How does it work? And how do you get it? I think are the sort of three questions that we should really try and answer. But before we dive into that, do you think it'd be useful to work out, or to try and work out at least, either in category or in specific, who the immortals are?
I do. Even though in many ways there's a very short answer to that, I think, which is anyone who isn't human.
Now you see, I think we're going to hit our first rub there, because you take someone like the Red King, for example. They're front of mind or he's front of mind just because I have only just finished Changes.
So you haven't read the series?
For the third or fourth time. But the Red King dies.
Spoiler alert.
Dead. If you've got this far into our podcast... he does. He just outright...
He dies, yes. And as do all the immortal Red Court vampires.
But are the Lords of Outer Night distinct from Red Court vampires other than in age? So
you see, that's already a really interesting point, I think, and is perhaps more pertinent to when we talk about the Black Court and Dracul, who, yes, is Black Court. I'm not having anything else.
All right.
Just straight in with the nonsense right from the start.
He's provably not.
I want to take the tinfoil hat off you because it just seems unfair.
But are any of the vampires immortal? Any of them at all?
I don't know. I mean, so my point there is that there's clearly a correlation, I think, between age of a vampire and their relative strength.
True.
And I think before Changes, had you asked me, can you kill a Red Court vampire? Well, quite clearly, because they're one of the first quote-unquote big bads that we see die in Bianca. Well, I mean, I suppose she gets dragged literally into the spirit world or whatever actually happens.
Yeah, but we see Red Court vampires die.
Yeah, they die and they're killed. And then there's, I want to say, Proven Guilty, yes, where there's the massive attack on the council where Michael shows up.
Yes, that's Proven Guilty.
As Harry's defending Molly, essentially, from the council. Because in that it's said that Morgan gets within arm's length, almost, of the Red King, and the suggestion is he's just going to kill him. So they're not, at least as far as I think the wizards view them, they're not immortal, and they clearly have killed them. But the counter-argument in my mind, and this will probably be the main theme of the discussion from me anyway, is I think when they're faced with the Fae, and even the She, they quite clearly think they can kill them, and we see instances of Harry killing She, But do they die?
Well, that's... I guess you're talking about Cold Days specifically.
Yes.
Where Harry kills a She-Lord at his birthday party. Or I guess in Summer Night.
Quite literally... Yeah, well, Summer Night. I think we'll put a pin in because that one's a real.
I'm not talking about Aurora. I'm talking about other She Knights.
No, of course. But I think, and this is really interesting, right? Because in those situations, he sort of kills them en passant, shall we say? And that's sort of the end of it. You don't necessarily you don't see him kill any named characters, and B, there's no sort of time where he walks past them and says, "Oh, didn't I kill you before?" A la
No.
Vulcan, maybe. Whereas, so I guess it's left up in the air, is what I'm trying to say, right? That these she might be dead, or they might have reincarnated somehow, or reassembled their bodies, a la the Earl King. Whereas the Red Court, well, all the Red Court is fully dead.
With a couple of possible exceptions, yes. There's a theory that the Ebes could have survived because they weren't in the material realm; they were still in the Earl King's domain. But I think, for all intents and purposes, yes, every single Red Court vampire is gone. Okay, but so who is definitely immortal? Maybe that's an easier place to start.
Definitely immortal.
Definitely immortal.
You know what? I'm actually kind of struggling here.
Okay.
Because the obvious
Earl
answer,
King.
I think, with the exception of the White God, although that we can
Oh gosh, yeah.
philosophize about that one. I guess the next most obvious answer would be old Mr. Sunshine, our favorite Uriel.
Yes.
But there's a book where he's quite clearly very mortal. In fact, he's kind of afraid.
But that's
he's not afraid, but he knows that he could be killed. He's definitely not afraid.
He murks a man. He's not that afraid.
But it's very much suggested that he could die at that point. So is he immortal? I don't know.
I think archangels are immortal. The point is that at that point, Uriel is not an archangel.
Yeah, and that's really interesting, isn't it? Because we described archangels previously as forces of nature, for lack of a better description. But there's an interesting disconnect, right? Because when he gives his grace, or whatever it is that he gives to Michael, he becomes a guy who's capable of dying. You would think that Uriel, being as powerful as he could just sort of morph himself into Michael.
Yeah, but I guess part of it is if he's... We're getting way off the beaten track so early, but I guess part of it is...
It was always going to be like this.
If Uriel were to... So the White God's big thing is all choice, right?
Yes.
So part of that is that all that Uriel can do is empower Michael to make a choice. He makes Michael more capable of making a choice than the otherwise would be. That's his whole thing. I can help you step out the gate. That's all I can do. Whereas if he were to go inside Michael, that feels very anime in a way that I don't think the Dresden Files particularly is. But also, Michael is less like being assisted in making a choice there. I don't know. It feels different.
Yeah, I guess what you're saying is that it's more or less Uriel imposing his will.
Yeah, because there's nothing. So the whole point is Michael gets given the jet engine, right? And then Uriel has no control over what Michael does with it.
Yes.
Michael could kill Uriel while Uriel has given him his grace, which Michael probably couldn't do if Uriel's inside him.
So I think that there's two sides to this, right? So as you say, that it's Uriel allowing Michael to make a choice and having faith that Michael is a good person, and my goodness, is he a good person?
But how does an angel that isn't capable of exercising free will have faith?
He doesn't need to exercise free will. He knows.
Faith is the ultimate expression of free will. It's choosing to believe something without evidence. That's the ultimate expression.
Maybe, yeah. I suppose faith is the wrong word, but Uriel, by virtue of what he is, has no choice but to believe.
The words just don't make any sense. Because you're right. That what Uriel has is faith that Michael will do well. But Uriel is also not capable of having faith.
But perhaps that's also too complicated a way to look at it. I suppose maybe the easier way of looking at things is that the only way that Uriel, and arguably other archangels or beings of that level, the only way that they can help a mortal like Michael is by making a sacrifice. Right? Uriel can't just give his power to a mortal. He has to risk his power. He has to risk falling. He has to risk death. Which that's that's very Abrahamic. That's not a term, is it?
No, it is absolutely the word Abrahamic.
Yeah, that sounds ridiculous, but then I suppose that's fitting.
Well, it's exactly the choice offered to Abraham, right? He had to make a sacrifice in order to show his devotion. He didn't actually in the end, but he had to show that he was willing. He was willing to make that sacrifice.
Yeah. So yeah, Uriel the person, possibly mortal, but Uriel the thing, the power that is Mr. Sunshine, immortal. But
Yes,
I think this brings us
definitely.
on to the core concept that we need to discuss somehow, which is what on earth is power? What are mantles?
Okay.
What is
Yeah,
immortality?
because I think
With
that
a capital I.
what we would discover really quickly is that anyone that we said was immortal, Mab, Titania, the mothers, the Earl King, Odin, actually what we're describing there is mantles. Right, so
Or are we?
Mab the person isn't immortal, but the Mab, the Queen of Air and Darkness, Queen of the Winter Court, is immortal. But if Mab dies at Halloween, Molly becomes Mab? Or does Molly become
She becomes
Molly,
the
the
queen
Queen
of
of Air and Darkness?
she becomes Queen of Air and Darkness. I'm pretty sure. Otherwise, what's the point of their names, right? Because it's not like Molly becomes Maeve. She's just
no, Molly
Molly.
doesn't become Maeve, that's very true.
So I don't necessarily see why. Because when you get to the top level of that particular side of the Never Never, right? You become Mother Summer or Mother Winter, and they each have their other titles, some of which we know, but no one ever calls them by their first name, presumably because people have forgotten what it is.
Yeah, but Mother Summer was Titania. Well, not necessarily called Titania, but she was Queen of the Winter Court. Of the Summer Court. Fuck, that's gone horribly
Well, we
wrong.
technically don't. Do we know that? We know that she's not the first Mother Summer. She
No,
may
that's
not have
true.
been the queen.
That's a fair distinction.
It's almost certainly the case that she was the queen, unless something really terrible happened to Summer one winter. But
she was actually just eldest Gruff.
oh, can you imagine? Yeah. Well, but you mentioned an interesting one there again, because the mantle of eldest, I think, is something.
Yes,
that does
that.
seem to be a mantle, right? And we've seen that with the Gruffs.
We've seen that with the Gruffs. We've
Although
seen
we
that
haven't
with
seen it with the Fetches, have we? I mean, we've seen
well,
eldest
we haven't
Fetch.
seen someone become eldest Fetch. We also assume that is eldest Fetch.
Oh, I think it's said, isn't it?
Is it ever explicit that he is the oldest, or it is the oldest?
I literally finished
Fetch?
this book about 3 days ago, and I've already forgotten. I'm pretty sure it's said specifically that he is eldest Fetch.
Okay, I'll accept that. I can't remember whether it's said or Harry assumes it, because those are two very different things.
And in the end, I mean, that eldest
really
Fetch's body explodes, more or less.
Yes.
But does that mean eldest Fetch is dead?
So my theory for some of this, and I don't have it completely coherently, is that this idea that mantles can only transfer at Halloween is flawed.
That's nonsense.
Well, it's provably not nonsense because it happens on the stone table.
No, but the fact that it can only happen is nonsense.
Oh, right. Okay, right. You're agreeing with me.
Yeah, no, I'm agreeing with you. I'm saying the concept is nonsense. I know it's a shock.
I'm so unused to that feeling. I didn't know how to react. No, I think that's the point. I think so. I can't put my finger on exactly it, but so take eldest Fetch for example. It is entirely possible that what happened in Proven Guilty is that Harry destroyed the body of the immortal being known as eldest Fetch, but didn't destroy the creature eldest Fetch, and so over the course of years, eldest Fetch will sort of reincarnate a body for itself.
Yes.
Equally possible, I think, is that a confluence of events meant that unloading summer's fire into winter's wellspring meant that Harry could actually kill Eldest Fetch. And so the mantle of Eldest Fetch would transfer to the next oldest, one assumes Fetch, who then becomes, for all intents and purposes, Eldest Fetch.
Okay.
I think either of those things are possible.
And so by that logic, could Harry in that moment have killed Mab?
By my own logic, yes. If he'd
assuming that she'd let him, because
assuming that she let him.
If he gets lucky,
yes,
would she have died?
Maeve would have become. That would have been bad. Maeve would have
been
Queen of Air and Darkness.
Yes, and I think that this is definitely an episode we're doing. Is what the fuck happened at Arctis Tour? Because, I said, I've just reread Proven Guilty, and it's a fantastic book, and I recommend anyone either goes back and reads it or reads that book. It really is phenomenal.
Really, where I think there's a lot of chat about what the first best book is. I think Proven Guilty is well in with a shout.
It is well in with a shout, yeah, for sure.
It pulls so many storylines.
Because I mean, we're now talking about one very deep concept, which is immortality and whether or not Eldest Fetch is dead. But that's only one of the unbelievable number of exciting things that happen there. Yeah, exactly. The Fetches are sort of, well, quite what their role in all of that is hard to know.
But staying on the Fae, you have said to me previously that the Fae have to be immortal, because that's the only way the outer gates work.
Yes, and this is analogous to one of my favourite arguments for many fantasy and sci-fi series is otherwise the numbers don't make any sense. And of course, in some examples, the numbers in fact don't make any sense. So yeah, let me walk you through that one. So it's interesting, right? Because as the series develops, it sort of starts off as summer and winter are very much polar opposites and perfectly balanced. And then, of course, we find out that that's not really true because winter is huge because they guard the outer gates. And so my thinking for them being, to all intents and purposes, entirely mortal. Now, I'm including anything from Mab down to some lowly goblin, and probably even the spiders that Harry runs into, as functionally immortal, because they must die a lot at the gates.
Just to jump in there, would you include Toot Toot in that?
Once he's declared, Wildfire are arguably a little weird, and I don't really have a good reason for why they're weird, except that they haven't declared for one court or another.
But we do know of at least one immortal Wildfire.
Well, but he's got a caveat, right? Because he is technically part of the Winter Court.
This is where Battlegrounds just confuses everything. What do you mean the Earl King is one of Mab's most puissant vassals? Get out of here!
I think that's Jim Butcher thinking, "Oh fuck, I've made him immortal.
How do I make this work?
He needs to be part of the Winter Court." But that's a very good point. That's a very good point. But my thinking for them all being immortal, is just because I imagine that they keep dying, and sooner or later the outsiders will just overwhelm the outer gates, and that clearly doesn't happen. So unless they, as I think you once eloquently put it, fornicate like rabbits,
and also manipulate time.
Yeah, manipulate time. I know, but I never liked that as an argument because it's so bloody complicated.
It makes everything more complicated, but we know that some sort of time fuckery does go on because Rashid is the oldest wizard by birth date, but not the oldest wizard on the council.
I know. Rashid is just so weird and confusing.
Such an alpha move.
But then wizards are confusing anyway, right? Because
wizards are confusing anyway.
Because Langtree is the... Well, I suppose Ancient Mai is probably the actual eldest
my
wizard.
assumption is that Ancient Mai is the oldest wizard, because that's the only reason that the word ancient would make any sense. It's a title.
But it's interesting, right? Because when you hear Harry talk about Mai and Christos and Langtree and Rashid, they're described as, older-looking wizards.
Mai is very old.
But when he talks about Ebb, like he's clearly talking about an old man. And when he talks about Listens to Wind, and when he talks about Marthaluti, like he describes them as like old and decrepit almost. Whereas Langtree's like this spry fellow, even though he's presumably maybe even
Well,
100 years older.
Ebb's also done a lifetime of old labour, right? Of hard labour. Right, he
He's
works
a
on
wizard.
a farm despite being 450 years old.
And maybe he's
Mai
immortal.
is described as ancient, like looking ancient.
Yeah, no, that is true.
Liberty, I give you. Listens is a hard one, and I'm going to put that down slightly blithely to him being Native American and that giving rise to sort of looking quite sort of weather beaten and aged. And there's no way to say that without sounding insensitive, and I don't mean to. But I think I
know what you mean.
Genuinely, hand on heart, apologise to anyone who took that in the way that it was not intended.
No, but I think I know what you mean. But I think that there's a little passage where listens to wind arrives and sort of like rubs his feet or something. Like he's quite clearly doing a sort of older person thing, you know.
He does, but right. I read a really interesting theory about this, which is that wizards. I think someone has been reading too much Brandon Sanderson, but wizards essentially age in the manner that they expect to. So Harry has more scar tissue than a wizard with his healing factor should have. But Harry views himself as a scarred, hard-bitten, hard-boiled detective, and so his scars don't fade as easily as others do. Ebb views himself as a hard-working, salt-of-the-earth type, so he doesn't... His sort of healing factor, again, keeps him looking like that. They remain looking the way they think they should look. And Langtry has such an inflated opinion of himself, rightly or wrongly, that he looks like classical depictions of Merlin.
Yes. No, I think that you're absolutely spot on.
And as I say, I can't take credit for that. That was someone else's good idea.
No, sure. As most of your good ideas are, I'm sure.
Absolutely. So,
but the interesting thing there, to bring it back to what we're actually talking about, is, we talked about the Merlin. That's one form of immortality, and it's one form of a mantle that's passed on to quite clearly different people who still stand for the same thing. Much in the way that if Mab were to die, the Queen of Air and Darkness does not die. It's a more instantaneous process, I imagine, right? When the Queen of, as in when Mab dies, that mantle of power, which is somewhat more tangible, I think, than the mantle of the Merlin.
So I think that's the distinction, that there is the mantle of Queen of Air and Darkness is a tangible amount of power, however much that be. I want to go very quickly.
It is, but is it actually, or is it just because we have three queens who determine how that power is used? Much like there is a White Council and a Senior Council on top of that who decide who becomes the Merlin. Because what happens if, Sarissa, Titania, and Mother Summer all died at once? What then happens? And also none of the Winterfell are around, because they sort of, with the stone table, get the power, and it all gets very confusing. All right, does the mantle endure? Does the power endure?
Power flows into the nearest and most Fey adjacent mortals, I think. In order,
or I guess she, right? They would probably go for.
Well, I don't know. Can a she become a queen? I don't think so. I have no evidence for this.
I would argue with you that that a Fey does in Sarissa.
But Sarissa's
she's a changeling,
never chosen.
So, but yeah.
So, but you're mortal until you choose, which is strange.
Because I know, because choosing is the whole thing that defines mortals.
Lily's also a changeling.
Lily's also. I'm also trying to think now of who could have possibly. I guess,
but there are a whole bunch of. I can't quite remember. I haven't got to Cold Days yet.
But it's interesting. But it's interesting you say that, right? Because if the mother dies, the power flows into the next queen, who's a Fae.
We've not seen that, but we assume so. That Mab would become Mother Winter.
Yeah, the same way that Maeve would have become,
or Maeve would have become Mab,
Yeah.
or the Queen of Air and Darkness, and
Yeah.
someone would have become Maeve. But because if you think it through, and I think I'm right in saying this,
I doubt it.
when Maeve dies, the obvious person to become Maeve, if it can be a she, is Jenny Greenteeth. No?
Why?
Because she's Maeve's number 2. She's Maeve's Lee. Or Leah.
Yes, so why wouldn't Leah be the next Winter Lady?
When Maeve dies, I mean.
Yeah, but why wouldn't it go to Leah, seeing as she's number 2 in the Winter Court?
Because it's a step down, I think.
Well, but
maybe being Mab's second seems to be.
It depends how you look at it, right? Because I think
we've stopped talking about immortality.
Well, it's all linked. I think we'll bring it back around to this somehow.
We will.
We've gone completely off piste. But I mean, we're talking about power, which is ultimately the source of immortality in many ways, right?
Yeah.
Because I think like when the Summer Knight dies.
Yes.
Right. I think the suggestion is that power could be taken by the Summer Queens.
It goes back to the Queens.
Exactly, and then they direct where it goes. So if the Winter Lady dies,
what happened with Rule?
Yeah, because I think that he gets killed, then
Aurora
takes it and puts it in Lily, right? So it doesn't just automatically go to Lily because she's like the nearest or something.
But when Maeve dies and when Lily dies, it doesn't look like Mab controls where the Winter Lady goes. The power decides. Or maybe Mab does, because Mab has been preparing through Leah both Sarissa and Molly. But then why would Titania choose Sarissa?
No, but I think Titania... Yeah, this is interesting. I wonder if Titania at that point in time doesn't have a choice because she's not there.
Maybe.
And interestingly, right, because Lily's power goes for Sarissa, who's the most Fae
But Lily also dies first.
Yeah, exactly.
So Lily dies first, and her power jumps to Sarissa.
Not Molly.
Not Molly, because Sarissa is more closely attuned to the Fae courts.
Or is quite literally stood closer. I can't quite remember.
Or is potentially literally stood closer. And then Maeve dies, milliseconds later, but it is later, and then so her.
Yeah, but the power doesn't go for Murph, for example.
Well, Murph is in no way Fae adjacent in the way that Lily has become through Ghost Story.
No, but is she more Fae adjacent or less Fae adjacent than Molly?
But Molly spends the entirety of Ghost Story being molded,
trained,
pre-Ghost Story being trained by Leah.
But either way, it doesn't. Yeah, it doesn't prove one way or another if Mab chooses where to put the power. And Titania's not there, so she can't.
Titania's not there. Mab does say, and I haven't yet finished. I haven't got to Call to Days yet, so I'm remembering this from my last read through. Something along the lines of, she had always intended Summer's power to go to Molly because she thought Molly had a better Summer Court temperament. So that implies that she did. Well, yes.
I think of between Sarissa and Molly, I think Sarissa is definitely the more summery one.
Despite being Mab's daughter, which is quite fun.
Yeah, but that makes Titania her aunt, so it's all good.
Yeah. It's also weird.
But I think we've definitely established at this point that the holders of that particular power are not immortal in and of themselves.
Well, I think they are.
No, the power itself is.
No, they're immortal save for specific circumstances. Which is the balance, the balance of them being immortal. Because all power needs balance, so they can't be immortal forever.
Oh, see, my head is slowly breaking this again.
I know.
I feel we've discussed this on and off in our own time. If on occasion,
we keep going around in circles. That's why we've brought it to an episode, because this is actually a cry for help.
Yeah, please comment, tell us, explain it to us,
save us from ourselves. No, the Fae are weird. I don't think you're right about all Fae being immortal, because, and I've just remembered this, in Battlegrounds, Molly says that she has been busy replenishing numbers.
Yeah, but what does that mean? That could mean anything.
I assumed causing winter Fae to breed? Maybe not. I don't know.
Or just looking after rehabilitation. Because, I mean, I don't imagine it's like an instantaneous process. You know, you die on the outer gates and tomorrow morning you're, you know, Tom Cruise, what's it called? Edge of Tomorrow? No.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is that, isn't it?
Live, die, repeat.
Yeah, exactly. Like, you know, die one day, back in the action the next day. I don't think it's quite like that, but I think their spirits sort of endure. Oh, I don't know, because I mean, they do also still feel pain and fear of death and stuff, right? Because we see that in the ogres and the trolls.
See that in the ogres and the trolls, and you also see that in the She listen when Harry threatens them after he kills that one, or does whatever it is that he does to that one in Cold Days. The rest of them listen to him. They don't, like...
Yeah, well, maybe it is still really painful, but they get reincarnated. Maybe it's more Lord of the Rings than we think, and they just chill in Mandos's halls for a little while.
Massive,
I don't know.
Massive crossing of the streams. I've got one for you, though. Hit me. Is Ferovax immortal?
Absolutely no idea. I mean, Sirovax definitely doesn't seem to be, or have been.
Unless the swords change the balance.
Well, yeah, but then that's the same loophole as the fairy queens are immortal, except when it's Halloween.
But but when I say immortal, I mean functionally immortal, like we see Mab in Battlegrounds essentially get impaled by like 75.
I think what's clear from all of this, well, actually I say that with such confidence, and perhaps it's not clear. Ferovax, to my mind, is ageless. The same way that I imagine Uriel is ageless. The same way I was going to say the She are ageless, but the mothers are quite clearly very old. So unless that's something to do with the power specific to the queens, that there's some element that they must age in order to pass on eventually, I don't know. And other She might be ageless.
Eldest Gruv looks old.
Yeah, he looks old, but I think that's arguably the same sort of argument as with the Merlin. He wants to appear old and
potentially.
Because Eldest Fetch doesn't. I mean, he looks like a scarecrow, so I guess it's hard to judge. But
that's confusing.
I mean, because the Fae are also shapeshifters. We have to remember. So
they are.
Maybe Mother Summer actually looks like a 25-year-old. It's really unclear. But Ferovax, yeah, he's immortal. Has to be.
So if I somehow were to walk up to Ferovax on Halloween and chop his head off, nothing would happen.
I think a lot would happen. A lot of power would be released.
Probability of that. So ask a different question. Are you saying that we need to differentiate? This is an unrelated. That we need to differentiate mantles from people? So the Queen of Air and Darkness is immortal, but Mab is not.
Yes, the same way that the power that is Uriel is immortal, but the body he astrally projects onto Earth is not. I have absolutely no idea.
I'm just trying to work out.
I think maybe I think where we're maybe getting caught up is we're talking about the She and the Fae, which are weird, as you say.
Yeah.
Perhaps starting with someone like Pharaoh is better, because I guess we have no evidence, right? Because he's clearly ancient, but it's not like he's...
We have some evidence, because as you said, we know Michael killed Sithorax, whatever his name was.
Something like those lines, yeah.
S something dragon. And I think we're meant to assume that was a capital D dragon in the same way that Ferovax is.
Well, Pharaoh would tell you differently, right?
Perhaps not of the same magnitude, but still of the same category.
Yes. I mean, Pharaoh says that he's the greatest of his kind, but then I suspect the dragons, as they so often are a little arrogant.
Never going to meet a dragon who's like, I'm the fourth best of my
Yeah,
kind.
exactly.
Don't worry about it.
And as you've mentioned, I think the swords are such a game changer for all of this because,
Yes.
I mean, something,
That's
Jesus.
what they do. They level the playing field.
Well, quite.
So maybe Pharaoh's not the right place to start.
Well,
You know where-
it's
you know
pure
where might
conjecture
be?
at that point.
You know where might be the right place to start? And
Odin.
this is seldom the case in the Dresden Files, but yeah, Odin.
Yeah. Odin, because now he's a really interesting one, right? Because I know you have some interesting theories on Odin, so why don't you tell us?
I have way too many theories on Odin.
Yeah, same. That's why I want you to go first.
The one pertinent to this is that Donar Vadarung, CEO of Monarch Securities, is not immortal. Kringle is immortal, and Vadarung. Vadarung is essentially going around picking up mantles.
You see, but no,
collecting power.
I don't agree with you on that.
Okay.
So what you're essentially saying is that Donar Vadarung is a guy.
Donar Vadarung is the being that Odin became after Odin put his mantle on a shelf.
Okay, so then who was Odin when Odin was wearing Odin's mantle?
Odin.
Right, so how can he give up his power and still be immortal?
Because he cheats. I don't know. No, the reason he can give up his power and still be immortal is his immortality is being derived from Kringle, not from Odin.
So now you're saying that the Shi are immortal?
No, I'm saying that the mantle of Kringle is immortal. I don't think the mantle of Kringle is a Shi mantle.
Ooh, I think Mab would disagree with you there.
She's welcome to. Doesn't make me wrong.
Yeah. I mean, Vadarung, aka One Eye, aka Odin, aka Kringle,
aka Beowulf, aka Lou.
Oh no, I'm not having that. You're not espousing that nonsense in this particular section.
No, I'll save that one.
I'll save that one
for another
for a hot take where I destroy you, live from live spouting such nonsense. He's not Ethnu's son. No. But yes, okay,
half
fine.
Half a dozen people listening to this who know nothing about Irish mythology just went, wait, what?
Odin is not Ethnu's son, damn it. So yeah, I guess he could be some inherently, I don't know, an inherently immortal being, or just timed it to perfection, or thought ahead. As in, he was Odin and thought, I will eventually give up this mantle, but I kind of want to keep living, so I also will become a Kringle.
So I need to spend some time building the idea of Kringle as adjacent to but distinct from Odin, such that when it becomes mantle level power, I can pick it up because I'm the person most associated with that power, and then I can put down the Odin mantle, put it in a skull somewhere.
Oh no!
So
you know what?
I
think now's the time. Now the time has come for me to call you an absolute idiot.
I didn't necessarily mean that it was Bob, but
you did, though, didn't you?
I actually didn't. My theory was going to be that Bob is Mimir.
Oh, for heaven's sake!
And Odin used Bob's skull, Mimir's head, to build a vessel for his own mantle. Was going to be my theory, but thank you.
And Mab chopped his head off. Chopped the head off Mimir. Is that what you're saying? Because she's angry with him.
Sure, yeah. Mab doesn't like Bob because Bob knows about Halloween. That's established.
Yeah, maybe, but she also told Harry about that. No, okay, but
no, Bob tells Harry
following
about
through where you're going with this. Yeah, but Mab knows that Harry knows.
Yeah, because Mab doesn't actually care. This is Bob.
Yes.
Anyway,
sorry. Okay, so okay. Sure, Odin decides he wants to become Kringle.
Yeah.
How does he do that? Is Kringle already a mantle?
Yes.
That he takes? Maybe. In which case, how does he do that?
Okay,
and
so
if Kringle is indeed part of the Winter Court, how does he do it in such a way that Mab gives it to him?
So, I'll accept that Kringle is part of the Winter Court because it probably makes everything simpler. Because you don't want to be creating too many different categories of power.
Well, yeah, and he personifies our winter in many ways, doesn't he?
Exactly. So I think it makes sense. It does raise the question of, is the Easter Bunny a mantle? But let's just leave that one for now. What I think probably happened is sometime as Christianity was moving into its ascendancy, so late first millennium, early second millennium, Odin Allfather foresaw, because we know he has foresight, he tells us that in Changes. Odin Allfather foresaw that his power was going to wane and he was going to be forced to make a choice. Who forces him to make a choice, I don't know, but we know from him that most of the gods chose immortality. Right? That's why Thor is playing football in the Midwest.
Mm-hmm.
But Odin decided he didn't want to do this because he's a meddlesome little shit. And so potentially worked with Mab, I don't know, to create another vessel of power, or to create another mantle of power.
So hang on, so you're essentially saying that immortality comes at the price of not being able to have any fun.
It doesn't know.
So you're saying that Thor...
Not that you're not able to have fun, but your ability to influence humanity as a whole is...
See, that's interesting though, right? Because Thor can
lessened.
be an unbelievable, super strong human who doesn't age and play college football as a choice, but he can't go to Chicago to fight Ethne. Is that what you're saying?
That appears to be the case, yeah.
Oh, that makes no sense, doesn't it?
Well, no, but we know it's the case. We know it's the case because else where is Thor in Battleground?
Well, that's a much bigger argument, I think. And why Battleground is such an interesting book, because Ethne and the Fillmore are quite clearly supposed to be this unbelievably big threat, and yet
they're endgame level threats.
Well, except that virtually none of the good guys show up to deal with it.
No, you've made that point. You've made this point before, and you've made it well, I think.
I don't know what to say. This is so unusual. You finally acknowledged my genius.
I wouldn't go that far.
The podcast series can end. I've achieved my goal.
You picked the easiest hole to poke in Battleground.
I mean, that's part of the genius, isn't it?
Okay, where was I going with that? No, so Odin and Mab work together to create, embiggen whatever it is, the role of Kringle until it becomes a self-sustaining mantle of power in its own right, at which point Odin somehow puts up the mantle of Odin and becomes Donar Vadarong and Kringle.
Okay, so I don't dislike that theory too much. I think my issue with it is, and this is perhaps giving a spoiler for a future episode of us, which is who the heck are Mab and Titania. But I would argue that Kringle...
There's a timing issue.
I think I would argue that Kringle outdates who we suspect is Mab.
I think that's true. So maybe Kringle worked with Mother Winter.
Well, not necessarily Mother Winter, but perhaps
the
previous Mab.
Yeah, and probably old Mother Summer. Or
if we assume that she were a thing when the Norse gods were in their ascendance or their power.
Whoever the queens were.
Well, if the queens existed.
Unless part of Odin putting up the mantle of Odin necessitated the change into the Winter Court that created Mab as a mantle.
Yeah, possibly.
Right, so maybe it's a much bigger sort of stellar change, sea change than just Odin stopped being Odin.
But the interesting thing with that as well, though, is that is very much a choice, right? That's a choice made by someone or something who at the time was quite possibly the strongest being in the universe. If we
Maybe.
believe in the concept that sort of belief in particular deities is linked to their strength.
That concept doesn't necessarily make sense, and this might just be because the Dresden Files is sort of quite aggressively Western European and Western civilization centric. But there's, Native American deities. There's
so sorry. I will retcon that statement by saying more powerful than the white god.
Yeah,
who I think now we agree is arguably the most powerful being in the Dresden universe, and the argument would still fly because there's, I want to say, majority of Christians, and if we include Islam
and Judaism,
in that. I don't want to say the same God because that's horrendous.
The Abrahamic,
to a lot of people, but
the
Abrahamic
term is the Abrahamic religion.
Yeah. So if we say that the white God is some entity that encompasses all those three, I think the power argument holds. So I can't say that Odin was at one point maybe the strongest person, entity in the universe, because there would have been, East Asian gods and
that's my issue. But I know
Hindu gods. But he was on that power level. I think. Now, where was I going with this argument? I've forgotten. Yes, Odin as some super powerful being, and we've discussed previously that superpower means limitations to act, decides that he just wants to be this immortal guy with a big round belly handing out presents.
He cheats somehow, essentially, is what happens. But this
he either cheats or he has just put his mantle aside, and can pick it up again.
No, my point is, my point is, it works in a very specific way with the Norse gods because they have Ragnarok. So my theory is that the Norse gods specifically were told, you have to go away until Ragnarok, or you stop being immortal. Go away.
So you're saying Ragnarok will still happen?
Yes, and that's when we'll see Thor and Frey and Heimdall and all of them, because that's a conflict that their power is intended to fight in, if that makes sense. So we'll see them in the big apocalyptic trilogy.
Okay, so you imagine the big apocalypse, the BAT is going to be some weird conflagration of all the apocalypse myths that exist.
Yes.
Yeah, no, I like that. I
yes,
like that.
It is. It's going to be. It's Ragnarok and it's Revelation and it's other apocalypse myths that I don't know.
Empty Night. That is quite scary.
But they're also all apocalyptic myths are variations on a theme.
all
much like most creation myths are variations on a theme. I think it's not as scary as it sounds, because it's just all of the good guys from every mythology against all of the bad guys from every mythology. And the concerning thing is that if it's based on Ragnarok, they lose.
Well,
it's worrying for us.
No, because things like Odin and Thor lose. But do they lose for a greater good?
In theory, but I think no one who's alive during Ragnarok sees it. Has always been my read. So it's part of an cycle of birth and death and regrowth. But
perhaps what the BAT really is the death and disappearance of all things immortal.
Maybe
archangels, Norse gods, Zeus pantheon, outsiders, and all that's left at the end is a real world filled with mortals.
I think we're assuming that the outsiders are immortal.
I think we have to,
because they exist. They sort of have to be, because they exist outside time. So saying that they're anything other than that doesn't make sense.
Well, what would happen to them in the real world, I suppose, is an interesting question.
What if you just left one there?
They become mortal, or would they succumb to time?
I've got a weird one for you. I'm conscious of time, and we have one big question still to come.
Oh, do we? Just the one.
Just the one. We've got lots of unanswered questions.
We could make a whole other episode on this, I think.
I think we're going to need to return to this. But during changes, when they're talking about the bloodline curse, they say, someone says, I can't remember who it is, says that there's a risk that what will happen to Thomas is that his human side will die, because that's the bit that's connected to Harry, but his hunger will continue. So, does that mean that the White Court are essentially half immortal?
No.
Okay.
Because no. Because I think it's that scene in what book is it where Harry?
No, of course it doesn't, because you can kill a White Court's hunger. Sorry, I'm an idiot. Because that's what happens with Inari Wraith.
Yeah, but that's before the hunger sets in. See, because I'm thinking of that exact book where Harry soul gazes Thomas, right? And essentially we get a glimpse into possibly what White Court vampires go through.
I think it's blood, right?
Yes, I think you're right. We have their mortal soul, presumably.
It's the mirror.
Constantly fighting, in the mirror with this demon, this hunger. Mm-hmm. And they're constantly pulling. But I think once one of those two entities dies, so will the other. With the exception of something like Inari, where you get rid of the demon before it's taken hold. I think it's a codependency. When you're at Thomas's level, it's a codependency, I think.
I see that. The only reason I was asking was because that's specifically called out in changes as a possibility for Thomas if the curse comes off.
Actually... Yeah, go on.
Sort of like what happens to the Red Court half vampires. Right?
Yes.
So some of them...
And they're interesting, right? Because...
Their Red Courtness dies.
Their Red Courtness dies. And it's also that scene when Leah just casually takes out the vampire bit from Susan and what's his name?
She puts it to sleep. Susan.
Exactly. So there's clearly two entities, and at least in them, because they're not full vampires, maybe there's something to be done.
Yeah. Right. So
maybe you could eventually even put those things in coins and have some sort of weird vampiric Denarians running around. Should be quite interesting.
Well, how have we not even talked about the Denarians?
Yeah, the Denarians immortal. I know. And I mentioned right at the start of the episode we were going to talk about the Black Court and their elders, and we've not.
Alright, we're going to need to... Alright, this needs to go up as part 1. We're going to need to come back to this.
Once we've seen a few more of Jim Butcher's books, maybe we'll get a better idea of what Immortality is. I mean,
maybe we'll get
as a spoiler.
I hope we'll get some more.
As a spoiler, the Black Court aren't immortal; they're just undead, which is a fine distinction. But I'm sure that it is one.
But Dracul is.
Dracul is just a Black Court elder.
What about Kincaid?
Kincaid? Oh, Kincaid. Well, there's a whole episode on what the heck is Kincaid.
Okay. Right. this has just become what is Immortality Part 1. But we're going to close
Why the Dresden Files has more questions than answers, Part 1.
Yeah, we're going to close this out with a short answer. Keep it short. A couple of sentences or less. Will Harry Dresden become immortal by the end of the series?
Not even a remote chance. Because it would undermine his entire essence. It's like saying the White God will become mortal.
Okay.
Do you agree or disagree?
So, I think I disagree. And the reason I think I disagree is the opening line to Stormfront reads, "My name is Harry Blackstone, Copperfield, Dresden. Conjure by it at your peril," which sounds exactly like the sort of warning you'd put on a bunch of journals that you were going to store in your office to give to your apprentice and to be passed down to their apprentices if you were capable of being summoned.
Interesting. I disagree with that.
Cool.
And of course, this is the great irony of it all, right? Because the true immortals in the series are the people who've written those journals. And not the likes of Mab. Although, ironically, they're in the journal, so I guess they are now too immortal. God damn it.
Thanks for listening.
To whatever this was.
Yeah, thanks for listening to this episode of Expertise is Overrated. No doubt we've said some things that were either objectively wrong or downright offensive. feel free to let us know, rate the podcast, and leave us a comment, or drop us an email at expertiseisoverrated@gmail.com, or tweet us at @zeroexpertise, or check out our website, expertiseisoverrated.podbean.com.
If you're lucky, we might just argue with you in one of our upcoming episodes, and if you're really lucky, we might call you an idiot. Now, in our next episode, we will provide the 100% accurate and definitive ranking of all 11 Star Wars films, so get ready for more nonsense.